Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Fleck, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Hidden Fears, Quiet Shame, Social Anxiety in Middle School to College Students. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Thomas Brown. Dr. Brown is a clinical psychologist. He specializes in the assessment and treatment of children, adolescents, and adults with ADHD and related conditions. He is the founder of the Brown Clinic for Attention and Related Disorders in Manhattan Beach, California. Dr. Brown is also a clinical professor of psychiatry and neuroscience at the University of California, Riverside School of Medicine, and an elected fellow of the American Psychological Association. He's the author of the Brown Executive Function Attention Rating Scales, and he is the author of 6 books on ADHD. We know that some children with neurodevelopmental disorders can have a difficult time in social settings. So we'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. What are your child's biggest challenges regarding social situations? Please select your answers and comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. For reading to supplement today's webinar, I recommend a few articles from the spring issue of ADDitude magazine. On page 46, you'll find our feature on how to nurture hope and resilience in children and young adults. And on page 23, we learn how the difficult childhood memories we carry with us actually interfere with making friends, and we learn how to change that. And on page 11, an expert explains how to help teen boys who retreat into video games develop friendships in real life. If you're not yet a subscriber to ADDitude magazine, we have an exclusive offer for webinar participants. Sign up today and get 15% off your subscription. Plus, you'll get a free copy of the ADDitude ebook, How the ADHD Brain Works, an $8.95 value. Click the link on your screen to get 15% off ADDitude and your free ebook right now. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Play Attention. Play Attention, inspired by NASA technology and backed by Tufts University research, helps students strengthen executive function, the key to managing anxiety, improving focus, and building confidence. With a personal focus coach and an intelligent AI system that continuously customizes their program, they'll gain the skills needed to thrive, not just survive in academic and social settings. Click the link on your screen to schedule your one-on-one consultation. Home and professional programs available. Visit www.playattention.com to learn more. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without further ado, I'm so delighted to welcome Dr. Brown. Thank you so much for joining us today and leading this discussion. Over to you.
Thanks, Carol. I'm very happy to be with you. Okay, what we're talking about today, social anxiety disorder, is something that is sort of a different version of something all of us have. We all worry sometimes about how are other people thinking about what we're wearing, how we look today, about what we just said, about how we've responded to situations and conversations and so forth. All of us have that kind of concern. But there are some people who really have excessive worry about what other people might be thinking about them. And some of the early writing about social anxiety was mainly focused upon people who were really nervous about having to give a presentation. But what we've now recognized is there are some people who are very nervous about how other people are looking at them in all kinds of situations that aren't necessarily presentations. So that we're talking about social anxiety here that is much more intensive and much more persistent than it really seems to be warranted. And it's the kind of thing that people experience as, what would my parents think? Or what would my spouse think? Or what would my son or my daughter think? Or what would my friends think of me if they ever knew this or that I have on my mind that I worry about? And sometimes it's just, when you ask what other people, sometimes they have specific names they can give you, and other times it's just anonymous of how other people are likely to see me. How many people have this kind of problem? It's not rare. If you look at the teenage years in the United States, say 13 to 17-year-olds, it's about 11% of girls and about 6% of boys. But if you look at the older age range, 18 up to 64, it changes. It's about 12% of people among the women and about 14% among the males. And yet the thing which is striking about this is that about only half of the people who suffer with social anxiety, way more worrying about these things than most other people do, ever seek treatment for it. Why? Probably because they have the same worry about how the therapist might be thinking about them if they were talking about how worried they are about these things that many other people don't worry that much about. And probably as a consequence of that, most of the people who do seek treatment wait a long time before doing it. And the average report is that only after you've had the problem for about 15 years are they likely to go and try to get some help for it. Let me just give you one case example. This is a 25-year-old young man. He'd been very timid since childhood. He'd never moved away from home. He did well. He went to school in a local college and so forth while he was living at home. But he could not go to a restaurant and eat alone. He didn't feel that he could comfortably go shopping in the grocery store. He had no problems as long as there was somebody he knew with him. But he was very much held back by the worry about how other people might look at him and what they might think about him. He worked part-time in his family's business, but he was not able to leave home or go out and do some of these other things which would be commonplace for most other folks. That's severe social anxiety. So what does this do to us? How does it affect people who have it? Well, the data that's available to us suggests that among those people who do have social anxiety, they tend to drop out of school earlier. And as a result, of course, their educational achievement is more limited. And an increased percentage of them remain single. They just don't get married. And for those who have social anxiety, get married, there are higher rates of getting divorced. So this is a variety of ways in which this social anxiety can impact very important aspects of somebody's life. What causes it? Well, there are some data available to us on this, and we do have reason to believe that there's some genetic factors. One of the most impressive studies was done at Harvard years ago, where they had mothers bring in their infants at about age 4 months. And the mother was standing right behind the child, or as a child sitting, watching some unfamiliar situation in front of them, which was not at all dangerous, but it was different from what the kids were used to. And what they found was that there were some of these 4-month-old infants who just tried a little bit and it didn't bother them that much. And there are others that totally freaked out about it and needed immediate attention from their parents from their mother in order to be able to deal with it. And then they did follow-up on these infants when they were 4 years old. These are the ones that they had seen when they were 4 months old. and checked them out to see where they were when they were 4 years old, when they were 7 years old, and when they were 13 years old. And what they found was that the kids who were freaking out most readily in that brief exposure to some unfamiliar sights, even though their mother was right there with their hands on them, had a much more, most of them had a persistent fear that would be called for social anxiety. And to go further on the genetic stuff, if you have a first-degree relative who has this, you've got 2 to 6 times the increased risk. Now, it's not just genetics, though. There are also environmental factors. If you have a child who's growing up with a parent who is very overprotective and doesn't want the kid out of their sight and doesn't want them to ride their bike in an area that's not immediately visible by the parents, even when most of the other kids of similar age are doing it. Or there are certainly some parents, not many, but there are some parents who just don't show much warmth for their children. They've got problems of their own and they're not able to be there or engage with them. And there are some families that are just socially keep them very much to themselves and encourage their children to keep very much to themselves. So you could have these genetic factors at play and or be living in a situation that just makes it more likely for a child to grow up fearful about having to deal with other people. And what they found was that, just referring back to that early study that Kagan and Stidman did at Harvard, that they had about 20% of them who responded with really crying and vigorous thrashing around. And there are 40% of them who had this at 4 months, just minimal crying and motor activity. And those were the kids that were much less inhibited as they got older. And so what they found when they checked these kids at sometime again, 3 to 5 or 7, and when they got them up at 13, the ones who were highly reactive at 4 months were much more introverted, much more cautious, much more dependent. And those with less intense reactions at 4 months tended as a group to be more bold, more social, more extroverted when they were 13. So some of this has to do with the genetics, but some of it also has to do with family life and what life experiences they have. So what we can say is that it's highly heritable. It runs in families. And we can also say that the median age for the onset of noticeable social anxiety is about 13 years old. And that 75% of those people who are eventually going to have social anxiety experience some difficulties with it sometime around between 8 and 15 years old. But there also are stressors. Some students experience social anxiety for the first time when they get to school and are having a lot more trouble being able to master the basic skills of reading, math, or writing, and anywhere near the way that most of their peers are. And there's some others who may be okay on how they do the academic tasks, but when they have to go to gym class and learn how to shoot a basketball or do somersaults, which many of the other kids do quite easily, these students, even though they might be good at academically, might be very stressed in doing it. There are different aspects of life in school that can increase the stress for students. And social anxiety, those who are a little more vulnerable to it, you see. And of course, another thing that, what we're looking at now is who is it likely to have difficulty with this? Kids who don't have very adequate social skills, who don't know how to talk with other kids and be able to join in some of their activities. Or people who are excessively aggressive. They're coming at. I'm talking now about how kids react to other kids who are excessively aggressive in their interaction style. or who acts babyish, immature compared to other kids their age, or who are just constantly pulling back themselves. Any of these may lead to overt or covert rejection or victimization by classmates. Another thing which is difficult is pubescent development. If you think what it's like for a kid, suppose that the average age for puberty for girls is usually someplace between about 8 and about 13. For boys, about 9 to 15. And if you think about it, those who are early, think about a girl whose breast development comes a lot earlier than most of her classmates. Often those girls are, in some ways, proud of the fact that their chest is developing, and others are very self-conscious about it, and some get teased and they're afraid of it. With the boys, their transition in the pubescent development, it's more problematic if they're way shorter than most of the other friends, or if they're having to change clothes in a locker room to go to a swimming class or something like that. But that early or late pubescence, the ones who start early in that growth, or those who are late, are a little more vulnerable to this sort of thing. But there are other ways that some people are more vulnerable to this social anxiety. If you're in a racial minority, if you happen to be one of a very few white people in a primarily Black or Latino school, or if you happen to be, a Black or Latino and in a predominantly white school, there's some more likelihood of social anxiety in that situation. LGBTQ, there's some people who get very negative reactions in their own family or in their school if it becomes obvious. And the autism spectrum, particularly the higher end, and the reason I say that is that those who are more impaired educationally on the autism spectrum are not having to interact as much with other kids the same age. And have the differences because they're more likely to be in programs where others are more like themselves. But for the higher functioning kids, the kids who might have been called Asperger's in the earlier manual, on the higher end in terms of IQ and so forth, they might be likely to have more social anxiety. People would be more attentive to their differences. Another type of social anxiety that you don't hear talked about very much is that there are many people who are, think about early teen years, who wondering, will I be competent enough to make out with somebody? Those people who have social anxiety are very likely to be much later getting into dating and maintaining social relationships. And even among adults who may be married, many are very hesitant about talking with their partner about things that they'd like to see changed in the partner's sexual behavior, or what worry about whether they're coming across the way that their partner's hoping. But social anxiety is not only about what you do, it's also, for many people, about what they're thinking about. Many people who have this in my work as psychotherapy will talk about they're very conscious about thoughts that they have or wishes. Sometimes it has to do with things they've actually done in the past, and they just wouldn't want anybody to know about that. Or it may be something where it's ongoing. For example, people who are making confessions in the Roman Catholic Church, in the confessional booth, the priests are very much aware of the fact that there are some people who are going on and on with long lists of their concerns, which they refer to as scrupulosity. Like, am I sincere enough in the way I believe by faith? or am I praying often enough, or is my heart in it? And for other people, the social anxiety may be about imagining things. It could be about what the things the person's done, but it could be also there are some people who feel self-conscious about things they've thought about doing or things they wish they could do. It's like, how would they react if ever they knew this or that I wish for? Social anxiety, what happens from it? Well, the statistics show us that about 3/4 of the people who have social anxiety, that may be the first way it is noticeable by parents and family members, very often develop phobias or obsessive compulsive disorder or other mood disorders. And about half of the people who have social anxiety disorder develop panic disorder, episodes where they're just terrified briefly, but it's overwhelming. Their lifetime rates of major depression, depending on which study you're looking at, could be anywhere from 35% to half of them. And you can sort of see why some people who try to deal with their social anxiety by drinking a lot of alcohol or using a lot of drugs, getting hooked on that sort of thing is anywhere from double to 5 times as likely. So that there are consequences to this social anxiety for some people. They're not the same for everybody, but it can get complicated. How can we assess for social anxiety? Well, just having a good idea of what it looks like is a big help. But there also are some therapists who are not even aware of the various ways in which people have this and can't talk about it. And you can see on this list various rating scales that can be used to try and identify people who have a lot of worry as kids or as teenagers or as adults about social anxiety. What can we do about it? Many people who are able to ask for help can benefit from individual therapy or possibly some family therapy with parents and kids, or a whole family group therapy. There are some cognitive behavioral treatments which are often helpful for this. There are the peers programs that started here in Los Angeles and have now spread out, where people are in a group program to learn more about how they can get along better with other people. And then there are also medications that are also useful for this. On this slide, you can see the ones at the top are actually approved for the treatment of social anxiety. But the ones that are listed below that, although they are not specifically approved by the FDA for treatment of social anxiety, they are approved for use for treatment of a variety of other things, including anxiety. And often those additional medications, are used to try to help people with social anxiety, and sometimes in combination. But let's talk a little bit about what this looks like in people. This is a 15-year-old girl. She just finished 9th grade. It's her first year at a pretty competitive high school. And she'd been getting good grades, before this, but now she's on academic warning because the grades are slipping, not because her test scores were low, because she just didn't finish enough of her homework and missed too many classes. And most of that was due to the fact that she was excessively perfectionistic. She had to get the first sentence of an essay to sound just right before she could write the second sentence. And then to get the second sentence had to be just right before she could write the third, and so forth. That excessively perfectionistic. And so it made it very difficult for her to complete assignments up to her standards. And then she would be so ashamed if she didn't have the homework ready and perfect that sometimes she didn't even get to class. A lot of worry about how she's going to be seen by the teachers and by her fellow classmates. Mike, 16 years old, 10th grade. Parents were really concerned about him. He was a bright kid. He tested high, but he had a lot of trouble completing assignments and usually got low test scores too. He was diagnosed with ADHD when he was 8, and he's now 16. And he's tried on several medicines, all of which had unpleasant side effects. Sometimes that happens when the prescriber is not enough familiar with the variety of ways people react to the medicines that we use for ADD. And what he told me about was I saw him singly after I had spoken with him and his parents together. He said he was smoking weed every night, and he said he felt he was worried about it until he discovered that his parents were keeping weed in the house too, and apparently they were using it secretly the same way he was. And he was complaining about how his parents were pushing him to improve his grades to get into a good college. And for him, the weed was a way of not having to think so much about it. Daniel, here's a 20-year-old. He said, I know that I've got ADHD. He'd already been diagnosed with that. But he said, I think there's something else that makes me awkward with other people. I'm always anxious, always nervous about what other people might be thinking about me. I never know if I'm really going to be too different from other people. And he said, I finally got the courage to have sex with a girl. He's 20 years old. It was okay, but then I couldn't think of anything to say afterwards. I just took her home and dropped her off. I didn't know how to talk about it. I wondered what she thought about me. Sandra, 25 years old. She said, I've earned lots of credits in 3 different colleges over the past 5 years, but I have not met the requirements for a degree. Asking questions in class is really scary for me. She said, I got a job as a helper in an animal shelter where I helped feed and care for dogs. I loved what I was doing. I like animals more than I like people. But one day my supervisor seemed critical of my work. I shouted at him and he fired me. And then I felt really depressed. You see that she was able to feel comfortable with the animals. They weren't going to talk back to her. But when it looked like she might be in trouble with her job, she lost it. Ted, 27 years old. He'd finished his college degree while he was living at home with his parents. But his social anxiety was so severe that he needed his mother or at least a close friend to accompany him anytime he had to leave his house. And despite the fact that he'd seen several psychiatrists or other therapists and he was trying a different medicine, it was having these severe social anxiety and panic attacks almost daily that involved vomiting and fears about how he could not survive if his parents died. These are some books that I've done. The one that talks specifically about social anxiety is the yellow one in the middle. It's just called Social Anxiety. And the others are dealing with ADHD. So let me stop at this point and hear what questions there might be for me to respond to.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to thank Play Attention once more for sponsoring this webinar. I'd also like to share the final results from today's poll question. We asked, what are your child's biggest challenges regarding social situations? 16% said meeting new people, entering unfamiliar social settings, and understanding how they come across to others. 13% said initiating or maintaining conversations or understanding social cues or body language. 11% said navigating group activities, being the center of attention or avoiding social settings completely. And 10% said preferring online interactions. Now to your questions. The first question is, my child takes stimulants for his ADHD. Does this worsen his anxiety, do you think?
Stimulant medications can worsen people's anxiety. but they can also help it. They are not the primary medicines that we use for treating anxiety, but some people who get stimulant medicines, which work quite well for ADHD if you get the dose right, and it make things easier for social anxiety, and some of them make it more difficult. One thing which happens a lot is that there are some physicians who've not had very much training in recognizing that the dosing for the medicines that we use, stimulant medicines we use for treating ADD, don't go by how old you are or how much you weigh or how severe your symptoms are. It's how sensitive is your body to that particular medicine. And so the fine tuning of the medicine needs to be done on an individualized basis. And if it's not, then that gets you into things where people will say, well, I've tried all those medicines for ADD. And then you start asking about it. You find sometimes they were being given doses that were way too small, and others people have been given doses way too big. And usually, if you can hit that right, social anxiety may be reduced a little bit by it, but often they need a different medicine that will help to reduce the anxiety itself.
Okay. We had some questions around how to help children develop self-awareness in social situations in a way that fosters confidence rather than anxiety. So one question is, what intervention can support them in building healthy self-regulation skills without reinforcing anxiety-driven inhibition?
Well, I think it depends on the kid, how old and personality of the kid. But the main thing that's helpful is having experience in interacting with other people. And so parents who are able to help their kids from an early age play with other kids and, supervise, of course, when they're very young, and then learning how to do it more freely. And you do it a little bit at a time. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but there are some people who find that much more difficult than most other kids of the same age. And I think, getting to the point where a child can be comfortable in, perhaps, for example, attending birthday parties. And at first, it may, with the younger kids, often many of the parents will stick around during the party and with the very young kids, and then older later. But to encourage a child, keep in mind that there's some kids for whom it's great fun to do this, and they're very happy to do it. But there's some kids where they're just very frightened about it. And they need some encouragement to be able to go and interact with kids and gradually develop the skills that most of the other kids may be picking up much more easily.
Okay, we have a question from a teacher. She says, how should I balance being empathetic, but also help a student develop resiliency skills?
Well, I think that's a good concern for teachers because what it means is that this teacher is realizing that some of these things that many of the rest of the classmates can do are very nervous making for a few kids, and then others don't have any trouble with it. But sometimes the teacher needs to spend a little time individually with the child when they see that they're particularly avoidant about it, and to acknowledge, to say, there are a lot of kids who, don't worry much about playing with other kids or going to birthday parties with other kids, but there are just some people who it takes them a little longer to be able to feel comfortable with that. And in my class, I want to encourage you to do activities with other kids. I'm going to assign you to do projects and so forth with other people, just like I would anybody else. And certainly be glad to talk with you about that. But I don't want you to, just stay away from that, because the more you stay away from it, the harder it gets.
Okay. A parent asks, is there such a thing as too much time alone? Do I respect my child's wishes to do their own thing, or is it just avoidance and he needs help?
It could be either. But I think it's a good question to be asking. If your son or daughter is just not spending much time with other kids, particularly to watch this when they're younger, it's important to try and get them to invite some kids over to your house, just one or two that he or she is able to feel comfortable with, and then encourage them to accept invitations to go to parties if they are invited, and I think if you've got a kid who just wants to stay in the house and watch TV or play video games all the time, and who's just not doing much in the way of interacting with other kids for any other activities, that's likely to become a bigger problem. And it may be you're dealing with a kid whose social anxiety is just greater than it is for most others. And what you end up having to do is just to put some pressure on them to do it. And you don't want to make a big campaign out of it, but look for opportunities to be able to get some of the kids that he or she is familiar with a little bit, and get them to do some homework together, or take the kids together to some, whether it's to watch a baseball game or to see a movie. Parents play an important role in helping kids to be able to tolerate the interaction with other kids, if they happen to be kids who worry a lot about that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And the main thing is not just to shake your finger at them and say, you got to stay, you got to do this all the time. You don't want to overdose it. Some people are, much more interested in playing with other kids their own age or that sort of thing, and some isolate themselves more. But the main thing is, if you're dealing with somebody who seems to be particularly anxious about it, it's important to look for ways of being able to get them a little more experience from the earliest years to interacting with other people. If you've got a kid who's having quite a bit of difficulty, or sometimes, say if the family moves and you're in a new community, a new school, and everybody is new, and there's that whole process. For some, it's an interesting change and it's fine, and other kids, it's terrifying. And some may need a little bit of extra help from a counselor at school, or possibly even from other relatives, or from a psychotherapist, because for some people it's just a bigger struggle to deal with the intensity of that anxiety.
Mm-hmm. A parent writes, when my child is spiraling and running through how she thinks others perceive her, what can I do in the moment to pull her out of this?
I think the first thing is, don't shut it off immediately. Listen to what the child is hearing and telling you about. And then ask some questions about the details. See if you can get any clues about what people are reacting to that make him or her be getting negative feedback from the other kids. And that requires the empathy to think about how the child's feeling, but also the strength to be able to help the kid be able to talk about these things, and to be able to gradually to get to do some things with other kids. Have them come over to your house once in a while, or encourage sometimes when parents might hang out with other parents and bring the kids along. But it's not something that's done all at one time. If you're usually going to see, if you've got a child who, excuse me, I'm going to blow my nose. If you see your kids having trouble with this kind of stuff, the easy thing is just to let them stay in the house and not push it. But you don't want to push it too much so that it's way too much for them to handle at a time. But it's important to look for opportunities to help them to be able to get more interactive with other kids their own.
Um, this question is similar to the teen who was spiraling. How to best help my teen overcome negative thinking patterns?
Yeah, well, one thing is that I would encourage is let them tell you what they're thinking, and then if it's not clear, find out where that's coming from. What are people saying, or how are people acting that makes them think of this as negative feedback, as it might be. But so the first thing is, don't just shut it down and act as though that's ridiculous. I don't want to hear any more of that. Inquire and try and get some picture of what the difficulties are, and then gradually look for ways of addressing it. Now, if you can do this when your child is very young, it's a lot easier. If you're dealing with teenagers or in college-age kids, they're more challenging, but it can be helped. But the main thing is to be sensitive to the fact that the fear that the person with social anxiety experiences is scary stuff. There's some, everybody has a little bit of it. All of us worry sometimes about whether the outfit we're putting on to go to this party or whether what we said in class when we had to get up and give a report, every one of us at times is going to be wondering about, how well it's going over. But I think that's important to acknowledge. And especially if you have had experience, remember the heritability of this issue. If you or your spouse, if you're dealing with your children, has grown up with some periods when you had some difficulties with this, then it doesn't make the kid feel as though this is insurmountable, because hopefully you're able to show and they can see from you that you're able to learn how to do these things, and that you can help them to be able to learn.
Okay. A mom says, my son is 12 and is taking medication for ADHD while at school. He's concerned that his friends won't like his behavior or personality outside of school when he's off his medication, so he avoids getting together with them. Do you have suggestions on how to navigate this?
Yes. I think that often people think that all they have to do with the ADHD is to give the medicine for school day activity. And the fact is that most of the so-called long-acting medications for ADHD, if you give it to them at 8 or 8:30 in the morning, it's often pooping out by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, for some people, it will last longer, but it often does not last as long as the manufacturer might ask you to think. And anybody who works, a lot with kids or adults with ADHD usually recognizes that it's necessary. The so-called long-acting medications don't last that long. And at least in our clinic, most of the people who need the medication, for school, many of them also need it for after-school stuff. And you can use the long-acting to give it early in the morning, and then at the end of the school day, or sometimes at lunchtime, give another dose where you bring it down a little bit. And then very often, if you're using the short-acting versions, short-acting usually kicks in a half hour, does its thing for about 4 hours, then it's done. Long-acting may last for 6 or 7 hours. Some people not so much. And there are many people who prefer to use 3 doses a day, 3 short-acting doses a day, if you're not a kid who would have to go to the nurse at lunchtime to get the pill. But I think it's really important if you're dealing with ADHD to recognize that there are some people where they do need it mainly for getting their homework done. I've got some people who don't need it when they're in school, but they do need it for getting their homework done after school or early evening. And then there are other people who just need it for school, but there are many people for whom it's very helpful for them to have that medication at school and then after school and also in the evening. Hopefully the prescriber will be somebody who's sensitive to the various needs of this particular person. And these are the medicines used for ADHD are not medicines where you have to maintain the same level in your bloodstream all the time. It's quite possible to start with a bigger dose in the morning and a little lower dose in the afternoon, and then a still lower dose in the afternoon or in the early evening to help them deal with the homework or the social interactions. And adults who are taking medicine, similar situation. There's some people with ADD who need that medicine more in dealing with their family when they get home than they need it at work.
So we have this question. My son has ADHD. He absolutely loves meeting other kids and trying to make new friends, but he has a really hard time maintaining relationships. He can come across as rigid, aggressive, competitive, and self-focused. When I try to talk to him about what it looks like to be a good friend, he gets defensive and feels criticized. I think there is shame here. How do you talk to kids about developing skills or raising awareness about relationship skills? Is there a script that she can use?
I don't think there's any one script that works, but I think what's important is empathy. If you think about how hard it is for a kid to say that the stuff that most of my friends and classmates can do without any trouble is harder for me. And it's also important to recognize that we as parents don't always know what's going to be the best situation. Sometimes the reporting you're getting is biased and you can't quite figure out what the other people are reacting to. But I think it makes sense to encourage the child to tell you what gives them the impression that this is not working out very well. What do people actually say? And then think with them about in the different ways they might react to it, and encourage them to at least find a follow-up on some things. They do get together with somebody, then to think with them about, okay, well, you went out and went to that baseball game last week with Jimmy and his dad, and now it's probably a good idea to think about whether you might want to ask him to come over to our place and do something as well. Strategies where you recognize and empathize with the social anxiety, but at the same time help them to do manageable tasks, which will help them gradually to get to know some of these other kids and how to deal with them.
Okay. What are some uncommon examples of social anxiety in middle schoolers, high schoolers, and in college students to help parents and teachers identify that this is an issue?
Well, the older kids are very hesitant in explaining it. Partly because it's embarrassing for them. Think about what I said at the very beginning about how many people who have social anxiety wait 15 years before they go to seek some help with it. Now there are many people where it's not that long, but the fact is, this is embarrassing to have this difficulty. And many people are embarrassed about being embarrassed in it because they can see that for most kids, this stuff comes much more easily. And I think the important thing is to be empathetic about the fact that this is hard, but at the same time, not be willing to just ignore it and act as though it doesn't need to be addressed. If a kid is having trouble getting homework done, a good parent is going to be finding ways to help them, figure out ways of getting that work done. And the social interaction is something where you also need it, but to listen to them when they even just hint at difficulties with social interactions. And then try to get them to think with you about, okay, what are the other people reacting to? Is there anything that you're doing that they keep commenting on, or what nickname they give you when they're trying to tease you? And think about it as a problem that you can put your heads together and try and address together. And if it looks like it's really a big problem, you may need to get, like a school counselor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help with it. But this is important. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be, wildly socially active, but you want to help kids to be able to develop their skills to at least find friends here and there and spend some time with them.
Okay. Someone writes, my son's anxiety became much worse during the pandemic. Afterwards, he's not been the same. He's much more introverted. She asks if you can speak about this.
Yeah, well, when we had the pandemic, there were some people who were grateful to have this opportunity to not have to be going out and doing much with other people, even though there are a lot of other people who are very unhappy about the way in which our social interactions were curtailed. But I think that, again, the combination of having empathy for the kids who don't want to do it, and I think it's important to realize not everybody is going to be a social butterfly. There's no reason everybody has to be. But it is important for kids to be able to develop some relationships with some other kids. And usually that requires somebody to help them sort out what are they hearing, what do people say, what don't they do, and think about how they can empathize with the way some people are treating them. But that's a strategy thing that parents can help with. But it's only going to work if you listen before you try to talk about it.
Okay. This college-age daughter has been out of school, has been out of college for a year now, and she hasn't made any friends. And her parents are worried and want to know how they can help her because she's older now.
Okay. Did you get any information about whether or not she has a job?
It doesn't say.
Okay. Well, I think that one thing that would be important is to address the fact that this kid is at a point, or this young woman is at a point where she needs to have some social interaction, and it might be getting a job, and it could be a part-time job. But if you let your kid just hang out at the house and not do anything further to develop their skills and experience, the social experience is important stuff too. And one way of getting it is they may not socialize a lot, but if they've got a job and they can go to the job and get the kid to tell you about the names of the other people and to encourage them about how to start a conversation and what reactions they're getting from other people. The social development is something that is not that easy for some people. And on the one hand, you want to be empathetic about it and not just shove them out the door. But on the other hand, if you keep them in the house all the time and don't expect them to be able to go out and interact with other people, presumably this woman would have been going to classes and interacting some with people when she was going to college, even if she didn't live on campus. But and it's not as though, we need all kids to grow up and be wildly interactive with everybody else. There's some people who are a little more shy. But the question is, to what extent do you just ignore sort of self-isolation, where the person just has not yet developed the skills to be able to interact with other kids? And it's a lot easier to deal with this when they're really young than it is when they're in their late teens or mid to late teens or early 20s.
Mm-hmm. We had a few questions around RSD. And this one says, is rejection sensitivity disorder similar to or connected to social anxiety?
Sure. Yeah, our rejection sensitivity disorder is a term which was developed to sort of identify the fact that there are some people whose feelings are very easily hurt, and that they are particularly perceptive about any signals that makes them feel that other people don't like them or are critical of them. And that's something that often can be helped. Again, if you're seeing it in early years and deal with it, it's likely to be much more manageable. But if you've got a child or a young adult who's very fearful, it's not like everybody has to be wildly socially active, but people generally do well if they've got at least a few friends that they see from time to time. And the things that parents can do is to encourage sons and daughters to talk with them about what's going on with other kids or the other young adults that they're hanging out with, and help them put into perspective, for example, things that may come across to your son or daughter as though this is really, damaging, my self-worth, and really to understand that other people are sometimes react to any one of us in ways that have not so much to do with us, but with what's going on for them. And get them to tell you the story of what's happening. And then be sympathetic. I think that it's important to be willing to listen to the story about what it is that makes them feel uncomfortable about the way this or that other person is treating them. And don't just immediately reassure them and tell them they shouldn't be worried about that. But if they are worried about it, get them to figure out with you why other people, particularly if it's more than just one person, are relating to them in a way that seems more critical, and how are they in terms of their ability to be somewhat friendly and associating on their side.
Okay, and our last question is, my son has ADHD. He's constantly seeking negative attention from his peers. He tries to be funny, but he doesn't stop. He gets in trouble in class with his teachers. He doesn't seem to understand that this is a negative loop. How can I talk to him about this?
It might be something where if it's persistent and it's happening in ways that are pretty obviously self-defeating, that might be something where you want to get some help from a school counselor who can give you a little more feedback on how he's coming across, if he's still in school or if he's not in school. Consider the possibility that he might need a therapist. And there are some people who need the medication not because they can't focus on their schoolwork, but because they're too impulsive in what they say and what they do. and they may need some help with the medication to be able to deal with their social interactions in ways that are not going to turn other people off. And that there's some who do okay at school when they're on their medication, but they don't have any medication in them after school. And for them, that may be the most complicated part of their interactions with others.
Okay, well, we're out of time. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with our ADHD community. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed doing this.
And thank you to today's listeners. If you would like to access the event resources, visit ADDitudeMag.com and search podcast 551. The slides and recording are posted a few hours after each live webinar. If you're listening in replay mode, simply click on the episode description. Please know that our full library of ADDitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts Podcast, and it's available on most streaming platforms. We hope to see you again next week for our free webinar on dispelling myths about supplements for ADHD. Make sure you don't miss future ADDitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at ADDitudemag.com/newsletters. Thanks, everyone.